Good morning. Welcome to Biology. I'm Paul Suchecki, and this is my classroom. It's great to see your smiling faces again. The topic for today is evolution. Evolution is the theory that species change over time. The problem with evolution is we really can't see it because it happens so slow. It takes millions of years, and the average human lifespan is maybe 80. And so we just don't see it. It's just a theory. It's not even a law, like gravity. In order to be a scientific law, it has to pass 3 tests. First, it has to be observable. Here, see? Gravity. Second, a scientific law has to be predictable. I predict when I let go of this book, it'll hit the ground. Wow, I'm not even a psychic. Third, a scientific law has to be repeatable. 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 And you get the same result every time. Like gravity. Like gravity. Like gravity. Scientific laws are proven. A theory is way different. A theory is a scientific idea based on evidence. Now, evidence is not necessarily proof. Evidence is support. And the more evidence for a theory, the more support. And the more support for the theory, the more people are going to accept it. A theory with no support is just a guess. And in science, guesses don't count. If there's no support for a theory, reasonable people won't take it seriously. And if all the evidence goes against your theory, it might be time to rethink your theory. The theory of evolution suggests that all life on Earth began billions of years ago from a single cell. That cell reproduced and formed a population. Through mutation, competition, and natural selection, life became more and more diverse. Over millions of years, life forms have become more and more complex to overcome the challenges of staying alive. Nature is the ultimate experimenter. Over millions of years, countless species have come and gone. Countless species have evolved and gone extinct. Species that, for whatever reason, couldn't keep up with either a changing environment or competition with other species. We know them from their fossils. Darwin called it natural selection, or survival of the fittest. Only the strong survive. But sometimes, it's not just the strong that survive, it's the clever. So is there any evidence for evolution? Is there any evidence at all to support the idea that all species are related and change over time? Well, let's talk about it. Homologous structures are body parts in different species that have similar anatomical structure but may have different functions. For example, if you compare the bones in a bird's wing to the bones in a cat's front leg, they're very similar. Compare that with a human's arm. They all have a humerus, a radius, and an ulna. There's an elbow joint and a shoulder joint. Anatomically, they're very similar. The muscles are similar too. Now, of course, they all have different functions. Birds use their wings to fly. Cats use their legs to jump. Humans use their arms to hug. Yeah, hug. That's what arms are for, hugging. Anyways, scientists think that species that share many homologous structures are related through a common ancestor that existed millions of years ago. Over time, the bones and muscles change to suit various purposes, depending on the survival needs of that species. Scientists think that the more homologous structures two species share, the more closely related they are. Now, if you compare a bird's wing to a butterfly's wing, the anatomy is very different, not even close. Body parts between two species that have the same function but totally different anatomy are said to be analogous. A bird's wing and a butterfly's wing are analogous. Even though birds and butterflies both have wings and fly through the air, they're not closely related. Species with many analogous structures are not closely related. Vestigial organs have no known function. Now, why would we have organs that have no function? Well, maybe we just haven't figured out what the function is yet. But what about your appendix? What does that do? Well, in humans, the appendix really doesn't do anything. Your appendix is part of your digestive system. It's located where your small intestine and your large intestine come together. It's about the size of your little finger, and it's a blind passageway that leads nowhere. Sometimes the appendix becomes infected and it has to be removed. That's called appendicitis. But other than that, in humans, the appendix doesn't do anything. So why is it there? Scientists think it could be a leftover organ, a vestigial organ, left over from a previous stage of evolution. See, other species have an appendix, and it does something. In rabbits and other herbivores, the appendix helps the animal digest plant material. Since we're not herbivores, we don't need an appendix. But maybe in the distant evolutionary past, we're related to animals that needed an appendix. But over time, our species has changed. Maybe our dietary habits have changed, and we're not strict herbivores anymore. And so we don't really need an appendix. And so we're losing our appendix over time, and this is all we have left. Maybe a million years from now, as our species continues to evolve, we might completely lose the appendix. How about your tailbone? Why do you have a tailbone? You don't have a tail. Maybe we used to have a tail. Can you wag your tailbone? If you're happy and you know it, wag your tailbone. Maybe in the distant evolutionary past, we're related to species that had a tail. A tail could be useful to keep your balance when climbing trees. But we don't live in the trees. But maybe our distant ancestors did. And since we don't need a tail, we're losing it. But we haven't lost it all yet. There's still a little bit there. Maybe as our species continues to evolve, a million years from now, maybe we won't even have that. Why do some whales have hip bones? They don't have legs. They don't need hip bones. They could be leftover. Why do some snake species have vestigial spurs where legs should be? Modern scientists point to similarities in biochemistry, like DNA, as evidence for evolution. Evolution happens through mutation, small changes in DNA over time. By comparing the DNA of two different species and noting slight differences in genes, scientists can almost build a family tree that shows how closely or distantly two species are related. The theory of evolution is widely accepted among scientists, but it hasn't always been that way. It was a controversial idea from the start when Charles Darwin published his book called The Origin of Species by Natural Selection in 1859. And with some people today, it's still controversial. In the early 1800s, a burning question in biology was how did the giraffe get such a long neck? Before Darwin, a French scientist named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck promoted an idea known as the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Lamarck suggested that maybe giraffes didn't always have a long neck. Maybe they had just a normal-sized neck like other grazing animals. He noted that environments often change, and maybe there was a change in the environment, like a drought. This could have caused a food shortage and more competition for food close to the ground. As competition increased, maybe giraffes looked for food in the trees, and they stretched their necks, and they stretched their necks, and they stretched their necks. I suppose it's possible with effort. You could probably increase the length of your neck if you just kept stretching it and stretching it and stretching it over your whole life. But here's the tricky part. They then passed their longer neck onto their offspring. In other words, they passed on an acquired characteristic. It would be like if I colored my hair blue and then had children. Should I expect my children to be born with blue hair? Or what if I was in an accident and lost my left arm and then had children? Would they be born with no left arm? Well, that's kind of what Lamarck suggested. There's only one problem with that idea. It just doesn't work that way. I suppose an adult giraffe could stretch its neck and through effort get a longer neck. That's an acquired characteristic. And acquired characteristics can't be passed on. It doesn't change your DNA. And the only way a trait can be passed on if it's in the DNA. So, nobody really accepts Lamarck's idea of the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Darwin's theory, natural selection, suggests that there's variation in a species. No two individuals in a population are exactly the same. Maybe in the distant past, in a population of giraffes, there was some short neck, some medium neck, and some long neck giraffes. If there's a change in the environment, like a drought, that causes a food shortage, it could increase competition for food. As food becomes scarce near the ground, the long-necked giraffes have an advantage. They can reach the leaves a little higher in the trees. The short-necked giraffes, they didn't make it. The medium-necked giraffes, they didn't make it either. But the long-necked giraffes had the right traits where they were able to survive in a changed environment. They reproduce and pass on their favorable traits. That's natural selection. The individuals with the right traits are selected by a changing environment. What complicates things is that a favorable trait in one environment might be unfavorable in another environment, and vice versa. As a result, species evolve and spread out over a wide range of habitats according to their adaptations. Animals with thick fur can survive in a colder climate. Organisms that resist drought can survive in a drier climate. Evolution is driven by a changing environment, but also by competition with other species. If a species cannot adapt to a changing environment or can't compete with other species for food and space, that species is going to struggle and possibly go extinct. In a nutshell, evolution works like this: mutation, competition, natural selection. When a mutation occurs in a population, and gives an individual a survival advantage. It's more likely to survive and reproduce and pass that favorable trait on. Over time, that favorable trait becomes more and more frequent in that population. Through dozens or even hundreds of accumulated changes over millions of years, a species can significantly change. A good example of natural selection that we can see in modern times is the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, or superbugs. Before the discovery of antibiotics, people would die from simple infections. These infections are caused by bacteria, but now we have antibiotics, which kill bacteria. Well, the bacteria aren't taking this laying down. Turns out that some bacteria are just naturally resistant to antibiotics, but they're rare. When we overuse antibiotics for purposes that they're not really meant for, we wipe out all the non-resistant bacteria. But the resistant bacteria survive, and so the resistant bacteria are becoming more and more common over time. What's changed? We've introduced more antibiotics into their environment, so they've had to change, they've had to adapt, they've had to evolve. So really, we've selected the resistant bacteria for survival. It's our own fault. Speciation is the formation of a new species. Speciation can occur when a population becomes geographically isolated. Islands are good examples of geographic isolation. Off the coast of Africa, there's an island called Madagascar. You might have heard of it. Most of the species that live on Madagascar are found nowhere else. It's almost as if they've been stranded on that island for millions of years. They can't get to the mainland to reproduce with other populations, and so they're isolated, geographically isolated. Over time, mutations build up in their populations that are different from other populations. If enough mutations accumulate, they're no longer able to reproduce with organisms on the mainland. Now they're reproductively isolated. Once two populations become reproductively isolated, they're different species. On the north rim of the Grand Canyon, there's a species of squirrel called the kaibab squirrel. On the south rim lives the gray squirrel. They're very similar, but they're not the same species. It's thought that maybe they used to be. Before the formation of the Grand Canyon, when the Colorado River was just a little trickle, a population of squirrels could jump across this little trickle, and they could reproduce with each other. But as the Colorado River got deeper and wider, the little squirrels couldn't jump across it anymore. Some were stuck on the north side of the river. Some were stuck on the south side, and they couldn't get across to reproduce with each other. Now they're geographically isolated. Over time, mutations build up in the two different populations. If enough mutations accumulate, they might not be able to reproduce with each other anymore. If that happens, they're reproductively isolated. And once two populations are reproductively isolated, they're different species. Divergent evolution is when one species splits into two. Divergent evolution is when two populations of the same species become more and more dissimilar over time, until eventually they become two species. As populations grow, they spread out, sometimes into new habitats. Over time, these separated populations adapt to different habitats, and they might become two different species. Think of the eastern timber rattlesnake and the western diamondback rattlesnake. They're very closely related, and they might have been the same species at one time, but the western diamondback is more adapted to desert conditions than the eastern timber rattlesnake. It could be an example of divergent evolution. Adaptive radiation is an extension of divergent evolution. Instead of one species splitting into two, many related species evolve from a common ancestor. I mean, come on, how many different species of cats are there? Convergent evolution is when two unrelated species adapt similar characteristics in response to living in the same environment. Sharks and dolphins are not closely related species, but they share the same habitat. For their lifestyle, nature favors a streamlined, hydrodynamic shape for swimming quickly through the water. Even though they're unrelated species, they do have similar body shape. Coevolution occurs when two or more species evolve together until one or both of them become dependent on the other. Sometimes it's called symbiosis, or is it symbiosis? Is it symbiosis or symbiosis? Symbiosis means same life. It's like two different species share the same life. Mutualism is an example of coevolution in which two species interact with each other and they both benefit. I call it plus because both species benefit. It's win-win. There are so many examples of mutualism in nature. How about a bee and a flower? The bee gets nectar from the flower. The flower gets pollinated by the bee. Win-win. Plus plus. Inside your intestines, there's a bacteria called E. coli. Don't worry, it's good bacteria. You give it a home, food, protection. E. coli gives you vitamin K. You need vitamin K. So you help the bacteria helps you. Win-win. Plus plus. That's mutualism. Parasitism is an example of coevolution in which one species benefits but the other one's harmed. I call it plus minus. A tapeworm living inside of a dog's intestines is a good example of parasitism. The tapeworm loves it. It gets a warm place to live, all the food it could eat, protection from all enemies. The dog, not so much. The tapeworm steals nutrients away from the dog, and the dog could become sick. There are lots of examples of parasitism in nature. Predator-prey is another plus-minus relationship. When a wolf eats a deer, when a cat eats a mouse, when a hawk eats a rabbit, the predator loves it. The prey, not so much. The world can seem harsh on living things sometimes, but built into the fabric of life, there's a resiliency, a drive to survive. There are so many obstacles to overcome, but nature finds a way. Actually, there are millions of ways. Each species is a unique solution to the challenges of staying alive. Each species has found its own way. Evolution is part of a paradigm. It's the way scientists see the world today. Given what we know about the world today, it's the best explanation that scientists can come up with to make sense of it all. Scientists don't know everything. We don't even know what we don't know. So as new discoveries are made and new knowledge is accumulated, our paradigms change. It gives you something to think about. And you know me, I wouldn't want to give you something to think about. Anyways, I'm glad you hung with me all this time. It's not easy to do. I hope you don't get lost. I hope to see you next time. Till then, have a great day.